US Army whistleblower Bradley Manning could get 20 years in prison for what he describes as an attempt to reveal the bloodlust and disregard for human life in the American military. Manning pleaded guilty to 10 lesser charges out of 22 he's facing for the biggest leak of state secrets in US history. Now, Andrew Blake is from the RT America newsroom. Andrew, evening to you. You saw the young soldier in the courtroom, the weight of the world on his shoulders. Describe how he looked.
You know, for the conditions that Private Manning has had to suffer during the last almost 3 years, what he did yesterday, his statement, his testimony, his admission was something way more powerful than I think most people would have expected given what he's had to endure. It's been over 1,000 days of detainment since he was first picked up in May 2010 and charged with releasing all this material, and since then he's had to undergo so much just completely egregious treatment. Nonetheless, yesterday there he was, this small man, only 5'2", you know, 100 and some odd pounds, sitting very calm, very collectively, very cool, right in front of the judge, and read a 35-page statement pretty much owning up to every single fact that the government has accused him of for the last 3 years. And people expected him to go ahead and plead guilty, but the way in which he actually honored what he did himself and the way that he actually still to this day is okay with releasing information and is aware of the significance, I think really shows this was someone who had committed to doing something and was aware of the repercussions and is okay with that.
Manning's words in his first public statement resonated with a lot of people, didn't it? What did he have to say? Fill us in.
You know, actually, in the press room, there was a couple dozen of us gathered yesterday, and just after around noon local time, when PFC Manning finished reading his 35-page statement, they turned his microphone off, he was done testifying, and a handful of members of the press gallery, actual journalists, began applauding. It was something that people had waited for a long time. Keep in mind, the only other time we've ever heard PFC Manning speak at length is when he spent hours discussing the treatment that he endured in a military break in Quantico, something that the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Torture completely condemned. So yesterday, though, here he was actually speaking very truthfully and with power about what he did and why he did it, and I think that resonated with a lot of people. It became something, not just a trial about someone who is convicted accused of spying and subjected to torture, but the trial of someone who was actually aware that things needed to change, and he thought he might be able to actually do that by blowing the whistle.
RT America's Andrew Blake, thank you for updating us there. Appreciated. Well, let's catch up now with Marina Portnair. She's in New York. She's been closely following Bradley Manning's case from the outset. Marina, good evening to you. He was apprehended back in 2010. A huge long detention and a rough ride, wasn't it?
It sure has been a rough ride since Bradley Manning was arrested in May 2010. Now, for the first 10 months of his incarceration, the former Army intelligence analyst was held in solitary confinement for 23 hours a day in a 6-by-8 foot cell, windowless cell, forced to sleep naked without bed sheets, and kept on suicide watch. During that time, hundreds of scholars, experts, advocates, supporters, even human rights advocates as well were signing petitions and letters to have him released from what was dubbed draconian conditions, essentially called torture. And for the first 10 months, this is how Private First Class Manning was held. And so that was a very difficult circumstance for him. He was essentially isolated. And after that, it's been a very rough ride since then. Many critics believe that the U.S. government, it was their intention to break Manning down and hold him in very bad conditions as long as possible. He didn't have a very quick process to get to his trial. I mean, it was just a day ago that we're talking about his pre-trial hearing, where he did end up pleading guilty to 10 charges. But many critics would argue that Manning was essentially forced into pleading guilty on 10 charges because of the conditions he has been held in by the U.S. government for over the course of nearly 3 years, but those first 10 years were dubbed as essentially torture. But at the end of the day, when Manning stood up and owned up to what he did, he still made no apologies for it. And some of the comments he said was that his intention was to start a public debate within the U.S. about America's foreign policy, how the U.S. was behaving. That was his intention on releasing the classified information. He said he believed the U.S. reputation would not be damaged, but the U.S. would, in essence, be embarrassed. He also believed that, quote, Americans had the right to know true cost of war. He went on and made lots of comments. As Andrew mentioned, a 35-page statement he read. But at the end of the day, he did explain what he did, why he did it. And from what I've been told and read about, he has made no apologies for his behavior and for his actions.
OK, Marina Portnara in New York. Thank you. Well, someone who knows what it's like to take on a government by blowing the whistle on wrongdoing is former MI5 agent Annie Machon. She says Manning has done the people a great service, at least to those who struggle to reveal the truth behind US helicopter attacks in Iraq. Let's listen in.
For years, the families of the victims, both the Reuters journalists and the traumatized Iraqi families, pushed the Pentagon to find out what had happened in that attack. And the Pentagon lied for years, saying that there was no video. They couldn't answer. They didn't know what had happened. So by exposing this, Bradley Manning gave closure, gave peace, gave answers to these traumatized families that have been lied to repeatedly by the Pentagon. I think it's also interesting, one other aspect around this is that he tried to give this information to other mainstream media outlets to begin with, the Washington Post, the New York Times, and the Politico website, and he was dismissed. And in fact, the Washington Post said that if they were going to follow this information, it would need to be vetted at a senior level, i.e. suppressed. So what we're seeing is the old model did not respond to this amazingly brave push towards transparency to inform the American people of what is done in their name. So he went to WikiLeaks, and I think that shows very clearly the role that WikiLeaks plays. It is a publisher of sensitive information, and by publishing such sensitive information, it allows the citizens of the globe to realize what is done by governments and to hold their governments to account and to try and push for justice, just as the families of the dead Iraqis and the Reuters journalists have been pushing for justice. So this is an amazing service he's done to people.